It's a high-stakes knockout clash at the Corsica Masters between two Indian titans. Krishnan Sasikiran has white against the legendary world champion Viswanathan Anand. Let's dive in. Sasikiran opens with a Catalan setup, looking to control the long diagonal. Anand immediately challenges the center, striking with c5, and the pawns are traded off early. Both sides now complete their development. Bishops are fianchettoed, knights come out to play, and the kings are quickly castled to safety. A symmetrical maneuvering game is ahead. The middle game begins with subtle repositioning. White controls the queen side space, while Anand brings his rooks to key files, preparing for the central break. The knights start dancing. Anand's knight hops into h5, eyeing the king side. Sasikiran pushes on the queen side, but Anand simply snaps off the pawn with his queen. Sasikiran challenges that aggressive knight with a bold pawn push to g4, and Anand is forced to retreat his knight back to f6. But here, Sasikiran misses a golden opportunity to seize a decisive advantage. He plays a natural-looking move, but there was a crushing continuation. The killer shot was pawn to g5, attacking the knight. After knight to h5, pawn to f4 traps it, and if the other knight moves to c4, knight takes knight on c4 simply wins a piece. But that didn't happen. Instead, Sasikiran plays pawn to f4 immediately, and this lets Anand right back into the game with a tactical shot of his own. And Anand unleashes chaos. Knight takes g4, a brilliant sacrifice. He gives up the knight to shatter white's kingside pawn cover and expose the king to a ferocious attack. What a move! Sasikiran has no choice but to accept the sacrifice, and Anand's second knight leaps into the breach, landing on the now vacant g4 square. White tries to patch things up, but Anand keeps the pressure on, and now the queen swings over to b4, joining the attack. The f-pawn marches forward to f6, kicking the bishop but creating more weaknesses around the white king. Anand retreats the bishop all the way back to h8. It's a slight inaccuracy, though. The engine preferred rook to e5, keeping maximum pressure on the center and sustaining the attack. And Sasikiran misses his chance to punish black's small slip. The position was calling for a decisive move to exploit the queen side. The stronger move was knight to c2. After queen takes the pawn on b2, queen to d2 defends everything. And after queen to b6, bishop to h3 would have given white a clear advantage. Back in the game, Sasikiran plays queen to d2, and this allows Anand to equalize immediately. And Anand doesn't hesitate. Queen to d4 with check, forcing a trade of queens and simplifying into a favorable endgame. Queen takes queen on d4, an excellent decision from Sasikiran. This was the only move to trade off the attackers and keep the position roughly balanced, and Anand recaptures with the pawn to d4. Also a fantastic move. It keeps his pawn structure solid and was the only way to hold the balance. The game transitions into a complex endgame. Knights and rooks are repositioned as both sides jockey for control. Wow, a brilliant counterpunch from Sasikiran. Knight takes the pawn on d4, a fantastic sacrifice to eliminate black's dangerous passed pawn and keep the game alive. Incredible resourcefulness. Anand has no choice but to accept, and his knight captures the powerful bishop on g2. King takes the knight on g2, the perfect recapture. Taking with the king was the only way to keep the position equal and avoid falling into trouble, and Anand's rook snaps up the pawn on e4. The dust settles, and material is once again equal in this razor-sharp endgame. Knight to f3. Another fantastic only move find from Sasikiran, precisely defending against black's threats. And here's the point. If black checks with the rook on g4, the king steps to h2. And after bishop to f5, knight to b1 holds everything together. Anand develops his bishop to f5, placing it on an active square and increasing the pressure on white's position. But here, in a very tense position, Sasikiran makes a slip. He plays a routine rook move, but a better option was available. The stronger path was bishop to g5, controlling key squares. After rook to b4, knight to b1 defends, and even after rook takes pawn on b2 with check, king to g3 would keep the game level. But in the game, the rook slides to c1, and this hands the advantage over to Anand. But Anand immediately returns the favor. He misses a winning blow and lets Sasikiran completely off the hook. The killer move was rook to g4 with check. The king is forced to h2, then bishop to e4 cuts off the escape. After king to h3, the pawn pushes to g5 and white's position collapses. A huge missed chance. Instead, Anand plays rook to e8, and the win is gone. White's knight jumps to c4. Anand now plays the check on g4 anyway, forcing the king out to f2, followed by bishop to d3. And this is the final decisive blunder. White needed to find a very precise defense to hold on, but this move loses on the spot. Rook to e1, rook takes rook on e1, rook takes rook on e1, bishop takes knight on c4, rook to e8, check. But after the move played, knight to e3, Anand has a simple tactic to win material and the game. Anand immediately cashes in, taking the rook on f1. Sasikiran's knight recaptures the rook on g4, but the damage is done. Pawn takes knight on g4. The perfect recapture and the only move that secures the win for black. Now watch the follow-up. If knight to d4, bishop to d3 attacks the rook. After rook to c3, bishop to e4 simply wins a piece. White is already in deep trouble, and this king move only makes things worse. A more active defense was required. The best try was knight to d4. After bishop to d3, rook to c3, and bishop to e4, rook to e3 could still create some problems. But in the game, the king recaptures on f1, and black's path to victory is clear. Anand's pawn captures the knight on f3, shattering what's left of white's kingside and opening up more lines for the attack. The rook moves to c7, but it's a desperate attempt. The better defense was to bring the king back to f2 to try and consolidate, but the position is already collapsing, and Anand brings his rook to e5, tightening the screws and preparing the final blow. A last-ditch check from the rook on c8, but it's just delaying the inevitable. King to h7, a calm, precise, and winning move. Anand simply steps his king out of check, and all of white's hopes are extinguished. The white rook swings over to f8, trying to create a threat against the f7 pawn, but Anand ignores it and plays the killer pawn push to g5, a fantastic move that creates an unstoppable passed pawn. The idea is simple. If bishop to e1, bishop takes the pawn on f6, and after bishop to c3, rook to f5 seals the deal, winning a pawn. Sasikiran captures the pawn on f7 with check. The position was already lost, but this move just accelerates the end. King to g6, the final brilliant touch. The king marches up the board to support its pawns and join the attack. Total domination. White's rook retreats to f8, but Anand's bishop simply captures the pawn on f6. After bishop to g3, the position is completely hopeless. And at this point, Sasikiran resigns. Anand takes the victory. White is down a piece with no counterplay, and black's threats are overwhelming. Here's just one way it could have ended. The rook takes the pawn on d5. Rook to b8 prepares to defend. But the b-pawn just marches up the board. After pawn to b3, rook to d1 check would be crushing.